Hello and welcome to Tipsy Tolstoy, Russian literature for the inebriated.
I'm Matt Gerasimovich. On this episode of the podcast, we're excited to be joined by Ali Pitts, host of the Russophiles Unite movie podcast. This week, we're going to be chatting about adaptations of Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, specifically Joe Wright's 2012 adaptation and Alexander Zarchi's 1967 adaptation. We're going to be talking heavy breathing, mustache licking, and everything in between. But before we get into our show, we wanted to give a quick shout out to our newest patron, Alex. Thank you so much for supporting the show. If you're interested in helping out the show, like Alex, take a look at patreon.com/tipsytolstoy. We put a lot of work into our tiers and rewards, and it really helps us out. If you're looking for a free way to help out the podcast, you can leave us a nice review on Apple Podcasts or sign up for our email list on our website, tipsytolstoy.com.
Yes, thank you for the updates, and also thank you to Ali for joining us. We're really excited to have you on today.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. It's a real pleasure.
Of course, Ali. Well, before we get into our usual stuff, do you mind introducing yourself a little bit to all of our listeners?
Sure. So as you can probably tell from the accent, I'm from the UK. I spent about 5 years living in Russia from my mid to late 20s. And I was big into films probably from the time I went to university and the couple of years between uni and heading out to Russia. And then my film watching kind of dropped off a cliff while I was out there, mainly just because of my work schedule. I was often working split shift, so it wasn't really conducive to watching 90 minute, 2 hour, 2.5 hour movies. So once I'd come back from Russia, I was kind of like, I want to get back into watching films, but I also want to keep up with my Russia stuff, my Russian language, my Russian culture, and, it sounds like a really pretentious word, but like engagement with Russian culture. So this was kind of a way of like multitasking, and I'd been on a film podcast a couple of times. It's long gone. It was called Classic Schmassic, where they discussed like old movies and with a certain reputation, and both of the movies I discussed on there were Russian movies. I had a really great time, and I was like, do you know what, I think I'll have one of these myself. Like, how hard could it be? It turned out doable. So yeah, and like several years and 50 odd episodes, here I am. So yes, so that's me.
Doable enough for at least 4 years and ongoing.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah. Occasionally I just go, like I do breaks between seasons, and I think that's pretty crucial to not like burning out after a few years.
Yep.
But yeah, no, it's still fun. And it's really cool how kind of collaborative the like podcasting world is as well. So you always get to new and interesting people. So yes, it's good. Like, I don't know why I'm trying to sell people listening to a podcast on the idea of podcasts. It's very weird. Just realized what I was doing.
I'm sold.
And I haven't even had a drink yet. This is not a good sign.
No, that's fine. Well, speaking of that, what are you drinking, actually?
So what I am drinking is Bielaya Berioska vodka, which is, it's a nice vodka with some birch juice in it. I've had this bottle for an insanely long time because, like, I feel like this is special. It was also given to me for a present, so I feel like I can only have it on special occasions.
Yeah. And
also, I'm just not a big vodka drinker. That's not a legacy of my time in Russia that I have. It did not convert me to that. So, so I am kind of cracking that open. So I will, I will have my shot of that.
Well, cheers.
Oh, here he goes.
I feel very bad that we didn't toast to anything, because
we can toast at the end once we've all introduced, and we'll toast to movie adaptations, some more than others.
Yes,
some more than others. What do you have, Cameron?
So I'm drinking the most expensive beer I've ever bought.
Ooh.
It's brewed in like one of the 5 or 6 breweries which are in my small town, which is weird. It's called the Machine Baltic Porter, inspired obviously by that Bert Kreischer bit about the machine, which after I learned Russian was forever ruined more for me by realizing that he was probably just saying I am a car, which is still funny but not quite as funny. But yeah, it was like $17 for a 4-pack, which is ridiculous, but hopefully it's good. Yeah. How about you, Matt?
So last episode we talked about how there can only be 1 or 2 nice drinks per episode, and the other person must necessarily fall because it's only 3 p.m. while we're recording. For me, I forgot to get a special beer, so I had to go out and I had to pour what I had on my drink cart. Which the first thing I grabbed was Jack, and I had a cherry Coke right there, and I said, "All right, let's experiment." And honestly, not that bad. Okay, I won't take crap from anyone for it.
Hey, it's a good drink.
And I will need it to get through one half of these adaptations.
Yes. So why don't we just go over a broad overview of the 2 films we'll be talking about? So Matt, you've actually read Anna Karenina, so can you give us like a brief overview of really the story, because both of the movies are close enough that it's not worth analyzing them individually, I think. Oh, well, comparing obviously yes, but explaining the plotline individually would be a bit overkill.
So plotline, I don't know how to explain a whole 800-page book in like 2 sentences.
Come on, condense.
Basically, the hardest challenge for adaptation, which I'm actually writing about right now, in my opinion, is the fact that it's separated into 2 main plots. You have the Anna Vronsky plot, obviously the one in which she has the affair with Vronsky, and cheats on her husband, Karenin, and there's this whole weird love triangle sort of deal. And then you also have the Levin Kitty plot line, which is kind of where we start and where we end. And Levin is this whole kind of searching for his soul and his proper way to live throughout the
Tolstoy analog.
Yeah, he's Tolstoy's self, which is written into the story, which is really fun and really difficult to adapt because most of it is like him reading philosophers and mowing grass for like hundreds of pages. So so both of these films we had discussed, I mean, they overview kind of these 2 lines, but mostly favoring the Anna plot line quite significantly, which is an issue that I take, but we can get into it later.
I can definitely see why they go that route, though, just in terms of like incident and kind of like dramatic and kind of like pulling the audience in. It's it's a slightly harder sell.
It adapts better to screen, I think, than a lot of the other some of the other parts. Yeah,
but it does seem like if it's an 800-page novel, you probably want to go the miniseries route. But
I don't disagree. Yeah, this is what part of the issue that I have is that Anna's plotline, honestly, in the book only takes up maybe 40% of the book. The other plotline takes up another 40%, and then you have a little bit of like Stiva drama, just kind of sleeping around and whatnot.
That guy is a drama magnet.
Yeah, I think it's. Do you mind if I jump into the 2012 film, then we can maybe go back to the 1967? Because
sure, absolutely.
I want to hear what you thought, having not read the book. I'm genuinely curious.
Yeah.
Well, I think Matt's already heard me go off about this for a while, but the 2012 film to me is like, I think it is what Wes Anderson like would have done if he was in charge of the cinematography of this film. But it's not Wes Anderson, so instead of having the film itself, like the scening is incredibly intricate in the beginning, where the whole thing is based around, okay, we're in a set basically, so the set is changed by extras in the background, and you see like the music that's being played, you sometimes see the people playing it. But he kind of forgets, or Joe Wright, or whoever's in charge of that, kind of forgets halfway through, because this wasn't originally written like that. That was kind of a rewrite. And so you have this like weird mixture of this incredibly intricate, like Wes Anderson style scening, and then just like weird naturalistic scening in the latter half of the movie, really. And it just doesn't mesh well, because the whole of the film really is condensing. That's like the whole name of the game. It really cuts out well, I wouldn't even say necessary. It cuts out most of the dialogue unless it's like directly related to what's going on. Most scenes are like only a couple of lines long, really. Like scenes which in the 1967 film are a couple minutes, or just like 2 or 3 sentences in this new film. So it's really condensing everything down to a very concise movie, which I think is admirable in some ways, because it covers a lot of ground in a way that is kind of engaging, but it also cuts out what the book is about, because so much of the book is internal life and kind of meandering about it, which is my main issue with the film, is that I think it's an interesting approach, but it just fundamentally doesn't work with the work they have, what they're adapting.
Yeah, it's a big challenge, isn't it? Because like film has a much harder time conveying books like that have a lot of like internal stuff and a lot of narration going on. So in some ways, you're almost obliged to do it that way, because otherwise you can end up with quite a like stodgy, static film that's just not very cinematic. So in terms of like making something that's nice to, this sounds really kind of dismissive, but nice to look at, like A++, it's a really beautiful film. But yeah, I can definitely see that. Yeah, a lot of thematic stuff does end up kind of on the cutting room floor, as it were.
It's a film that's incredibly full of spectacle, but it's kind of like sound and fury signifying nothing, if I can be somewhat cheeky about it.
A nice Macbeth allusion, I think. Yeah, or quotation rather than allusion.
Yeah. There's so much in it. It's so bombastic, and it really is very over the top. And I think it could be interesting. It's just the work itself. If it was its own story, I would be interested in it. But because it's, I think, losing so much in the adaptation in this style, it just kind of made it hard to watch for me overall. Even though it's like flashier and faster, I was so much more engaged by the 67 film just because there was so much more there to pay attention to, really, than this one, which, like, a lot of the character motivation honestly gets cut in favor of like heavy breathing, like Matt alluded to earlier.
Yeah, this one is definitely the raunchier of the two, which probably should come as a surprise to nobody, seeing as there's the whole what was it, the Sovietskum Soyuzia Sexanet whole thing.
Yeah. So this the 2012 film, my favorite accolade that has made it into this article I'm writing from the Alliance of Women Film Journalists, they gave Wright's adaptation an award for movie you wanted to love but just couldn't, which is how I felt about it. Like, he's actually not a bad director. He's done good period pieces previously. He has some scenes that I think are really stand out. Like, I people might consider it cliche, but I thought the dancing scene, particularly between Anna and Vronsky, the way everything fades and he uses the light, and obviously the costuming is fantastic. And that was a scene where he really shined. And then everything after that, just right downhill.
Oh, it's funny. Yeah, I liked it, I think, more than both of you guys. I don't know how much of this is like my reading of the novel was so long ago. I read it, like, it was literally the first Russian literature I read when I started it when I was doing my A-levels before I went to uni, and then just like put it down because I was like, I should probably actually try and study for my exams. And then I picked it up again in my first term at uni, and then just, because apparently that is a good thing to read. Your first time away from home. I know. Dense, depressive Russian literature. That's the way to go, because that is undergraduate alley brain.
Yeah.
I have to say, I was surprised that because I actually looked on Kinopoisk, which is, if you're not familiar with it, it's essentially like the Russian IMDb or Russian Letterboxd. And generally speaking, like, Russian critics didn't hate this. Like, there were more positive reviews than negative. That absolutely shocked me, just because I kind of anticipated that they would almost like hate it on principle.
Right, yeah.
So that was a pleasant surprise, and maybe that will teach me for being like just like stereotyping Russians as just being like, you Westerners adapt some of our culture. No, automatically bad. You don't get it. No, thumbs down. And apparently they weren't like that. So that's kind of interesting.
That is.
Yeah, it even has a slightly better like audience rating than it does on IMDb. I mean, it's still not hugely high. It's like 6.8 versus like 6.6. But yeah, it's still pretty high. Did you know who was the writer of the screenplay for the 2012 version?
It was Stoppard?
Yeah, Tom Stoppard. So I don't know whether I'm not super familiar with, because he's had a long and illustrious career, but I do really like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead by him. So it's kind of interesting that you have somebody who has like a literary / theatrical pedigree doing the adaptation. So
I think it had a lot of good parts. I really do. And I wanted to like it, but I think one of the things that from people I've talked to about it, where they really missed an opportunity to do better, was the casting. I don't know if I agree with the way the movie was cast. I think Jude Law plays far too sympathetic of a Karenin to make the story ambiguous, because you want to side with Jude Law, for one. And two, I don't think Kiera Knightly is a good Anna Karenina. I think she plays... I don't know. From the books reading, Anna doesn't look like Kiera Knightly looks.
I wondered whether you would mention this, because I don't know if you're familiar with Michelle Birdie from the Moscow Times.
From Twitter.
Column. Yeah, oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. Also been a guest on Russophiles Unite. I just thought I'd drop that.
Yeah, I think I listened to one of the episodes where she was a guest, yeah.
Oh yeah, she was an utter star. But I remember, and this was probably, I actually read this in the physical newspapers back when Moscow Times was still like physically on the stands. The columns she wrote around the time, and I think the word in Russian, one of the words, obviously, because he obviously uses several, but he describes Anna as roskoshnaya, I think. Which the nearest translation it sounds like would be like voluptuous,
full-bodied, perhaps.
Yeah,
yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, like I feel terrible that we're three men discussing like women's bodies. It makes me feel a bit icky, but like, you know, clearly Kiera Knightly is a very beautiful woman. But as Michelle Birdie pointed out in her column, roskoshnaya is probably not the first adjective that you'd be reaching for. So yeah. That was a familiar point to me where, yeah, I
think it really just reflects kind of change of beauty standards between the actual novel and then 2012, of course. But
sure.
I think to me, it allows Joe Wright to kind of cast her in this sort of temptress position, which I don't know if I would characterize her as in the reading per se. And so that's where I get kind of a different, like, I'm like, okay, he clearly had a vision of what Anna Karenina was going into this, perhaps. Or he just wanted to take the Pride and Prejudice cast and say, okay, I'm going to recast you in different roles, which is possible.
Well, of course, because you also get Matthew McFadden coming, you know, from playing the romantic lead in Pride and Prejudice to being like the goofy Epicurean side character. I have to say, both actors playing Stiva seem to be having an absolute freaking whale of a time.
Yes,
they had to have.
Yeah, they are having so much fun. I have to say, actually, the Russian actor Yuri Yakovlev, he is kind of like for 60s and 70s Soviet movies, like their MVP. He just turns up in a lot of stuff, and he's always just like fabulously entertaining.
I liked him a lot.
And he's got quite a lot of range as well. Like, he's always playing different, you know, very different characters. So yeah, he kind of in some ways like reminds me of like a Russian John Cleese, but he's a better actor than that.
It's interesting that you both bring up the Joe Wright's previous work, because I watched this with a friend who'd seen it, and when she was watching this, she saw a lot of parallels with that and just the filmmaking style. And that's was something I didn't notice as much until I watched the 1967 version, where I was looking at it and I was like, this is, getting back to the idea of it as spectacle, really interesting, but like kind of divorced from the realities of its time, of what this was actually in, like what it is like to be in Imperial Russia in the late 19th century and among the aristocracy. Because, you know, when you're watching the 1967 version, obviously you have people who are, you know, French is a default language, so you have people who are dropping in and out of French into German.
Oh, there was so much
English.
French.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of different languages, because there are people from, you know, all over the world coming to the capital of Russia to help out with various things, and it gives you like a sense of scale, or just people from around the world. Whereas the, you know, 2012 version is just everyone speaking English, and of course you hear Russian in the background sometimes, but that in other ways, it just seems kind of divorced from its time period, and really could just be like a period drama anywhere, really. If you told me like this is, I don't know, English society, and then change the costuming a bit, you know, I don't think too much would have to change in order to make it believable.
Yeah. It does feel like, because if you just write the major plot points out of Anna Karenina, the novel, you go, this sounds pretty melodramatic. And it's almost like, well, it sounds melodramatic, so let's just lean as hard as we can into the melodrama to the point that we basically fall over.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed that. like returning to your earlier point about like the whole like theatrical setting, and the fact that they kind of forget about it and then like remember again at various points. I kind of like that. It was weird. It was almost like watching a musical at times, just without the songs,
Right.
just because you had like this highly choreographed like stuff with the kind of the like in Stiva's office where you have all of these people like stamping stuff in time. I did quite enjoy that.
That was a beautiful transition the first time into the office, from the train tracks right into the stamping. I noticed that on my second watch. Ooh, that was nice.
Yeah, in terms of visual flair, it's just like chef's kiss.
Yeah.
It's yeah, the cinematographer and set designers and all the technical folks, well, and of course the director as well, just, you know, really earned their money in that regard.
Yeah.
So.
I think it is successful, and like what they're doing, I think is really nice. It's just the story itself that I think that just doesn't marry it, because I think I saw at least the introduction of the naturalistic perspective was more so when they're in the countryside away from the city, and I thought that was kind of like a nice divide to have. But it just, like the rest of the story, there's so much spectacle, which I really like it. It's just like so much of what I got from Anna Karenina is like kind of subtle characterization, and in the 2012 film, it's really like their equivalent of that, because they've taken out so much dialogue. It's just like Kiera Knightly staring off into the distance, where she like kind of smiles painfully and then goes off and does something. Whereas in the older film, I'm able to follow the logic of what the characters are feeling and why they're doing things much more clearly.
Yeah, it also is a very interesting and bold choice to like every so often just like whack you upside of the head and remind you that you're watching a performance of a thing, and just kind of like de-invests you in the characters. I guess I still felt emotionally invested, but it did strike me as a weird choice. That said, I have heard, and I haven't read Anna Karenina in Russian, but I have heard some people say that the tone of the narration is often like quite like, maybe not distant, but there's a certain amount of like irony there.
Big time. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting, because that was definitely something that I didn't particularly pick up when I was reading it as like an 18, 19-year-old. I just took it like at face value and dead seriously, and that's obviously a big challenge as a translator, is kind of conveying like someone being slightly sardonic and sarcastic like in another language.
Right.
I don't want to like get into it too much, but a lot of it comes from just, I mean, there's really heavy irony, particularly when you get into the Stiva part, because the way Tolstoy like uses narration is absolutely fascinating, and people have written like a lot of stuff on it.
I can imagine.
Yeah. But Stiva, I mean, there'll be plenty of paragraphs about Stiva just, oh, woe is me, my wife is so old, and she's, oh, what's a man like me supposed to do with a wife so old? I mean, Stiva, she's like 1 year older than you.
Yeah, it's really funny. This is a total coincidence, but I was just rewatching a couple of little parts of the 7 Year Itch, and I don't know if you've seen it, but it's basically this late-ish 30s guy is in New York in the hot summer. He's sent his wife and kids off to the summer, and he has a similar like wine rant about how his wife is old and lost her looks, and it's basically the same thing as Stiva. It's just like in a like mid 20th century New York setting. But it did make me think like this is also like a just common like male delusion about like how men age versus how women age. But oh yeah, it's just like Stiva. It's he's funny because he's a fun character to be around, but he is also awful. He is such a terrible person.
Yeah.
And yet quite fun to hang out with, which is probably like one of the many truths of the book, is that like the terrible people in life aren't always the worst people to be around. Like, goodness me, like, sorry, editorializing, but in British politics, our frickin' Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, he's a fun guy, but he is also a dreadful human being.
I think that's what Tolstoy sees as evil characters. They're not the ones that you look at and you're like, oh, this person's actually the devil. The evil a lot of times comes from the fact that it's difficult to pinpoint that they're doing something evil in the moment unless you have kind of this large scale look that we get into the multiple conversations and the internal monologues that Stiva has with himself.
Well, and just the refusals to change, because he seems to genuinely feel guilty about having hurt Dolly, but does that mean he doesn't have a fling with an attractive ballerina later in the plot? No, it doesn't.
I think he forgets instantly. He has like no memory. That's kind of that's where his evil comes from. That's how he hurts people. It's not a malicious evil, which is why he's fun to be around, but he's also horrible to everybody. Like in the 67 version, they have the thing of his wife and his kids in the carriage, and she's trying to get Steve's wife is trying to get clothes for his children, and she says, "Can I have some money to pay?" And he reaches into his pocket and goes, "Just tell him to put it on my tab or whatever. I got to go get some fresh oysters."
Yeah, it's just like nailing his character. Because he's just like such a kind of Epicurean hedonist. It's just like, nope, the oysters are calling my name, so...
Yeah. Well, speaking of the 67 version, do you mind if we jump into that? Although, one last thing.
Of course, yeah.
Kiera Knightly licking... I don't remember the actor's name who plays Vronsky, but she like licks his mustache in one scene when they're like trying to just tell each other how much they love each other, and they're like, yeah, "You are." It's like honestly, it's like they're just sitting like in the forest. they're just sitting in the forest, but it's like if you put this audio over them at like the sex scene, it would make just as much sense as them sitting in the forest together. And then they kiss, but she like licks his mustache first, and it's a real big close up, and I just.
It's a bit much, isn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, let's get into the 67 version a bit more, which is similar in a lot of ways, but then towards the end really starts to change, and I think that at least for me, it makes a lot of the difference in the way I see these two films.
What changed it for you? Why do you see it differently?
Well, in the latter half of the film, obviously this film has a lot more narration overall, and there's a lot more people talking. Something I mentioned earlier about the 2012 film, it's very compact, like very little dialogue doesn't serve the immediate plot that's happening. Whereas in the 67 version, there's no compunction about having dialogue that serves no purpose other than pure characterization, even if that's not directly relevant. And there's a lot of scenes they add, especially towards the end. There's like a greater slowness at like towards the end of the film, which I think brings out a lot more and kind of relates a lot more to Tolstoy's theorizations, which you really kind of lose almost entirely from the newer film, which isn't better or worse. It just is something that I thought worked with the theme of the movie, with them focusing more strongly on the characterization itself.
Yeah, I think one of the characters whose lines are really, really, really drastically cut are Karenina himself. Like, he's probably one of the characters whose characterization is most different. I noticed, I mean, I don't know whether you're familiar with the like 80s British sitcom Yes Minister / Yes Prime Minister. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
No.
Well, it has this bureaucrat called Sir Humphrey, who is he's like a legendary comic creation, but his ability to just make something that's relatively simple sound incredibly complex through bureaucratese. Karenin reminded me of that, because just the way that he speaks, he just, if there's a short word, he will try and find a longer word like to say instead, and he just has like these long like rambling monologues.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm realizing I'm a podcaster. Long rambling monologues, pots, kettle, show a little self-awareness here, but yeah,
I think you're right.
Yeah, he's more ridiculous in the Soviet version. I don't remember him actually being physically violent with Anna, though. And that was the one thing in the 2012 version that's kind of like, if you hadn't had that one scene where he shoves Anna to the floor the fact that he shoves her to the floor at all, obviously terrible.
Yeah.
But he shoves her to the floor while she's pregnant, and that's like, if you took that out, he's actually quite sympathetic, even though he's portrayed in terms of his costuming and Jude Law's posture and like haircuts like in a very severe way. I have to say, props to a very handsome man like Jude Law just being like completely uglied up for the role.
Yeah, I was marveling with my friend I was watching with, and we were both like, how does he look so much older in this film from 9 years ago than he does today, like right now?
Right. And this was probably around the same time that he was playing Dr. Watson in those Sherlock Holmes movies where he's very dapper and handsome and dashing.
Yeah.
And here he's just this kind of like, just very serious, again, pot calling kettle, balding.
Yeah, but very sympathetic to what Matt's point earlier, that the whole film, it's like, it's hard not to feel for him because he's just kind of like hanging around trying to do his job. And then, Anna's having her whole plot line where you see why Anna's kind of like not really into him in the 67 version, or at least I followed, in that you see, like you said, that he's really self-contained. And I love the scene where they're at the races and he's just rambling on and on about sports and how that relates to a civilization's civilizedness or not. In the 2012 version, he's stalking Anna. She doesn't know, well, she initially doesn't know he's there. He's like kind of hiding in the crowd. But this one, he's just hanging out with his wife, just going off. And you can see that she's just like trying to focus on her lover in the race, but like really just trying to do something. And he just can't stop talking about that. Writ large, that being your whole life, I can see why, if you were just marrying for convenience, a personality like that over time would just be like, oh my God, please shut up.
Yeah. Well, and the fact that this is at the time where she can't go out and get a job of her own so that she's got something to, get a sense of satisfaction and, enjoyment out of. It's like she's kind of dependent on her personal life for kind of all of her fulfillment. And she's just married to this incredibly boring, like, bureaucratic weirdo. I have to say, again, in terms of like differences between characterizations in the two, the Vronskys, like from this one to that one, like I think I was more judgy of Anna in the 2012 one because, oh my goodness, the 2012 Vronsky is such a fop.
Yeah.
He is such an insufferable fop. And I'm just like, yes, he's kind of hunky. He has killer cheekbones and a nice bod, but he is just like the most like self-regarding just piece.
This is why I think the casting was off. I was watching this with my girlfriend who also hadn't read Anna Karenina, the 2012 version, and she was like, I don't get why she's going for Brodsky when she's married to Jude Law. Like she just couldn't get past it.
I haven't seen it in full. I've only seen bits and pieces here and there, but there's a 1997 version with Sean Bean as Vronsky, and I'm kind of like, that makes sense. That makes sense. Most straight women, given that are going to have a much harder time not running off with 90s like Sean Bean.
Unfortunately, they cast him with probably the only person who seemed to have no screen chemistry with him in that adaptation.
Okay.
Sophie Marceau, right? Yeah, that was...
Yeah, although again, on the Tolstoy vision of what Anna should look like, Sophie Marceau is probably more that type than Kiera Knightly would be, but yeah. Sorry, I've swerved us from...
It's fine. I've watched so many of these. I love watching these adaptations.
Oh, and there have been so many as well. Like, I was just looking at the list of them. It's just like, yep, this is a story that people keep coming back to. And I mean, part of it's just going to be name recognition if you're just like cynically what sells. Oh, people have heard of Anna Karenina.
Yeah.
It's Russian and melodramatic. Let's do that. It's been 10 years. Sure, yeah.
I want to get into Anna's character in the 67 version because even though she and Kiera Knightly's character in the 2012 version are functionally the same, I think like there's just, as you pointed earlier, there's a major difference in just, I don't want to say sympathy because either way you kind of see where they're coming from, but just the whole film in 67, I follow her arc so much better. And like up until the very end where the whole conclusion, it all completely makes sense to me just in terms of like, I see where this is going, or especially because in the 2012 film, it's really all about the downs. You're really seeing Kiera Knightly's character at like, I feel bad, when I'm not around Vronsky, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the major differences that the 67 film had for me, which is not even a big thing, is just you see when she and Vronsky run off and go to Italy, you just see that. And just like, it's maybe a minute or two of them just having fun in Italy. It's just a montage. But the contrast of her feeling just awful with when she's married to Karenin and then having so much fun with Vronsky, it really made so much of a difference to me that it's not just like I feel bad, now I'm with Vronsky in the 2012 version, and now I'm with Vronsky and I feel bad. You see her height, and then when Vronsky kind of falls into the same pattern that Karenina did, which is much more, I think, better shown in the 67 version, you see why she starts like falling into that like pit of despair where she has abandoned her whole life for a man who's like, I'll be there for you forever, and then he falls into the exact same patterns that her former husband did, kind of leading into this pit of despair of like, well, I can't go back, I can't go forward, there's nothing left for me, which made so much more sense to me.
Yeah, and on a related note, I feel like in the 67 version, her falling for Vronsky is much more gradual, whereas it's almost like it flips a switch from her just being like, no, this is a really bad idea, to, you're hunky, so I want you, and damn the consequences, whereas much more like gradual in the 67 version. Of her just kind of going, oh, well, spending some time with him's not that bad, that's fine. No, we're not doing anything wrong. And it's just a lot more like believable that's how it kind of develops, rather than just being like, okay, you're hot, so I want to sleep with you.
Yeah. And then we're having like massive fights or big scenes in all of high society, whereas in the old version, it's like very subtle of, Anna spending a lot of time with him, people kind of whispering, and Karenina is mad that they're being made kind of fools of in public society instead of, as in the 2012 version, Vronsky, his horse falling and breaking its spine, and her like having a massive like, almost leaping over the banister, Vronsky or Alexei, are you okay, et cetera, which is, it fits with the 2012 spectacle, and I don't think it's a bad choice, but I think it just, the 67 subtlety fits the story itself better. I don't know if there are any major things about the 67 version that stands out to either of you.
I thought the music was interesting because it was often very jarring and very kind of like, even from the perspective of now, like quite avant-garde sounding, like just dissonant and kind of screechy and kind of like, uh-oh, bad stuff is afoot. Whereas the music in the 2012 one was much more conventional, and it fit very well with the sort of the very heightened aesthetic that they were going with, but it was much more like conventional. So, which is funny because in terms of the look and sound and pacing of the film, the 67 version is much more like straight down the line.
Right.
But the music choices are quite bold. If you were just to listen to the soundtrack, I don't think I would want to just listen to the Anna Karenina one divorced of it, because it's just quite unpleasant to listen to, but it does quite work, I think.
Right. Yeah.
I think for me, just the casting I liked more in the 67 version. I've talked about it several times now, but I think everybody fit the characters that they were supposed to play a little bit better, particularly Karenina. I think that especially him being older in this one kind of accentuates some of the discomfort in the marriage and just the blandness, I guess, of him as a character. He really captures the bureaucrat sensibility that he has in the novel, I think, especially just his lengthy words and phrases.
Yes.
That being said, there is one scene which I think worked better in the 2012 film, which is later in the film, Anna is basically left, and Karenina goes to see Stiva, and they're kind of having a dinner party. In the 2012 version, they have a dinner party where they talk about a duel fought between a man and his wife's lover, and he ends up killing the lover, and they talk about it for honor. In the 2012 version, Karenina kind of gets into it, obviously, because he's pretty raw about this. And he says, what use is dueling? If the lover had killed him, what use is that? What does that do for anyone? Whereas in the 1967 version, it kind of just, it's a moment that passes very quickly. It doesn't really have a meaning. And then Karenina does go on to have a conversation with Dolly, Stiva's wife, about that, which I think works really well. And it's not in the 2012 version, but I think that dinner scene captured something very uncomfortable that really, really worked for the film. And I think could have, I liked it. I liked that a lot better than how they handled the 67 version.
Yeah, because Karenin is a very like practical and like sensible man. Like, and for him, the romantic, the capital R romantic solution of like, well, just have a duel, like, is just, he just doesn't think the world should work like that. And it's like you sympathize.
Yeah.
I mean, you would totally understand him wanting to kill Vronsky, but like he's smarter than that.
Yeah. Karenin is just more of a character in the 67 because you get his internal arc where in 2012, Jude Law is like, he's just too sympathetic. He's just like beaten down by the world, where Karenin in 67 is angry. He's out to get revenge, and he's dealing with that because that's not usually who he is, and it's like something that's tearing him apart, but he is still being a massive dick in like the divorce proceedings. And I think that makes him more interesting as a character.
Oh yeah, like the fact that he doesn't even want to keep Seryoja.
Yeah.
He's mainly doing it just because he knows that is the way to make sure that Anna is not able to be happy,
yes,
like having run away. And part of that is just like selfishness on his part, is that the fact that his wife has run off makes him look bad in society and may affect his career progression. It seems to be the subtext.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's like massive double standards about the consequences for having an affair. Like, I mean, and that's kind of almost the point of the Stiva character. Is just like, look how easy men have it. But yeah, there's still like a social consequence for being cheated on.
Yeah.
In society at that time. And now as well, like it's not like, people will make snide remarks if a famous person, you find out that their other half is having an affair, you're just kind of like, oh, what was going on there? And it's terrible.
Yeah.
Because, it's not necessarily their fault.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was, you mentioned earlier the way that the two like diverge at the end. I thought it was interesting, the 67's version to stop where it did. Was one thing that I didn't totally like. I kind of got it, but at the same time, I did like the 2012 one having a little bit of the sort of repercussions in the world, and also just like following up with Kitty and Levin / Ljovin's story as well. I like the fact that there was actually a little bit of closure to that. That is an interesting point as well. Sorry, is Levin is. The 2012 one really, really felt like it was taking the piss out of that character, whereas the 67 version, like, probably was a bit more faithful to probably Tolstoy's vision, seeing as it's an autobiographical character. But I kind of liked the choice to make Levin be, like, all self-serious in the 2012 version, because, yeah, that is kind of how that character does read to a modern audience, even if that's not Tolstoy's intent. Like, just his hat and the stupid beard and stupid hair. It's just...
Yeah. I think you're right, actually. That is something I really will give to the 2012 film, is that... So I haven't read the novel, so obviously I can't say how true this is to the characterization. But for the film they were shooting, I think you're completely right, that he is still fulfilling the Tolstoyan archetype, and obviously in fewer words. But from a modern perspective, and we're kind of making fun of him a little bit. Not saying he's wrong, just so he's like a little overdramatic at times, et cetera, he doesn't always completely follow through with what he's thinking. And then Kitty, I again can't speak to Kitty's arc in the book, but she actually kind of gives him a character arc in like the way they play off of each other, which I think is interesting. And I kind of like what they do with Kitty in the 2012 film for the film they were shooting, and that she changes him in the way that she transgresses social norms in order to help Levin's brother, even though his wife is a former prostitute, which is a black mark on him and his wife as far as everyone else is concerned. Well,
and the fact that they have that whole Nikolai character, because one of the things I remember from way back and reading the book was the Nikolai character, and just like I just remember the awfulness of the way his illness is described, and just feeling like so bad for him. I just like the fact that he actually gets included in that version, even if he is very like much a supporting character.
Yeah.
I like that they fit him in, whereas I don't know what the motivation for leaving him out in the Soviet 60s version was, but yeah, it's kind of sad that he doesn't make it in, but you've got to make cuts somewhere. That said, talking of omissions, it's weird, and I hope I'm remembering this right, but we don't have Vronsky's suicide attempt in the 2012.
I was going to mention that, yeah.
Surprising, considering like all of their other choices are just like amp up the drama. I don't want to, that sounds very flippant to describe a suicide attempt as drama, because it's obviously a very serious thing. But like from a like melodramatic plot way, you could easily characterize it that way.
Joe Wright said he didn't include it because he didn't find it believable, which I thought, what do you mean believable? You're making a movie based on something that was written. You don't have to believe in it.
And also, like, Vronsky wanting to end his own life because he is messed up about the situation isn't believable, but Anna's is. I mean, yes, the societal consequences aren't quite as severe, well, aren't nearly as severe, let's be honest, for him as they are for Anna, but still, you can see him being messed up by it. So, yeah, I thought it was weird that they took that out. Again, there's a lot to cram in, and you have to make some cuts there, but that did seem like a big omission.
It seems like a big one not to put in. It's not just like, oh, his brother that, is kind of a side plot. That's like, they didn't really cut out much from him. He's a central character, and that's like a central part of what happens after he visits Anna at Karenin's house, being just completely emasculated, I think.
And it's going to contribute to Anna being really, really messed up. The fact that this person who says that their whole life is about you and, like, loves you so much is, like, willing to do that and just cause you all that pain. I mean, suicide, clearly not a rational thing, but, like, it's gonna affect her and contribute to how messed up she is just because it's, it's so serious. I feel like they do an equally good job of, like, Anna's sort of, like, paranoia sort of eating her alive, essentially. Like, even though they probably do it in a shorter space of time in the 2012, it's just like that. I found that really affecting. It's just like, oh my goodness. Just like, you're seriously your own worst enemy here.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think either way, like, her arc, although I personally prefer the 1967 one because I can follow it, the way she is, I will give Kiera Knightly props in this regard. She does convey pain very well, and maybe that's just because, like, her smiles to me always read like she's slightly in pain for some reason. But her kind of conveying a silent, like, desperate pain really comes through, and I'll give her props for that.
I noticed an interesting thing about her performance too, is that in front of most of the characters, she seems like she's putting on an act, like she's speaking in a slightly more, like, affected, a slightly pretentious way, and the only time that it drops is when she's talking to Dolly, actually. Like, it seems like Dolly is even though in that scene with Dolly, she's very much manipulating her. It does seem like that's probably the actual Anna, rather than just, like, the front that she puts up for everyone, which I thought was interesting, and I didn't necessarily notice there being that much of a difference in the 67 version, but part of that is just I'm not a native Russian speaker, so I'm just not quite as well tuned to that. But, I mean, I feel like I haven't talked enough about Tatiana Samoylova, because she does give a really fantastic performance.
She does,
but
yeah, she was great.
Yeah, and I don't know if you guys have seen her other two famous films. I mean, you've almost certainly seen The Cranes Are Flying. Fantastic in that. And also Letter Never Sent is very worth watching as well. And it's a shame she didn't make more movies, but, Soviet cinema wasn't the most efficient, so, and, paucity of good female roles. Definitely a problem in the 60s. In the Soviet Union, as it was, well, as it still is everywhere. But anyway.
Yeah. This is very off topic, but I do want to bring up, in the 2012 version, when Levin and Kitty are, like, having their kind of makeup, well, maybe let's get married. I just can't get over the fact that they're spelling it out with, like, children's blocks. And maybe it's just because my friend described, when I was watching it with my friend, she was like, I think they're playing sensual Scrabble for illiterates. And I can't get that out of my head because, like, it's just such a weird thing for them to be doing.
Yeah, and that happens in both versions, doesn't it? So that presumably must be a thing that's in the book, because it's so long since I've read. Is it not in the book?
They do it with chalk on the table.
Oh, so that's right.
They spell it out, but the blocks were a little much.
A little much. Yeah. Random detail in terms of my watching. The Soviet version, my wife watched about the first half an hour with me before she was just like, I'm too tired, I'm going to bed, and, I don't want to watch depressing Russian film with with you anyway. Which is funny because she is a Russian lit major. That's what she did at university. And she speaks way better Russian than me, but she's just like, yeah, do you know what? I can take it or leave it.
Yeah.
But she was very, very critical of like the hair and makeup and costuming choices of the Soviet version. And she kept saying, like, does Anna have a mustache? Or a mustache, because she's American, and that's how you pronounce it. But and yeah, in the early scenes, that does seem to be. But part of it is just like the version I watched on YouTube. It seems like the film is not in the best like state. Like I don't know. Some of it you wonder, is that just Soviet film stock occasionally being a bit crappy?
Yeah.
And how much of it is just, this is an old negative that maybe hasn't seen any love since it was put away in a can when they stopped showing it in cinemas in the Soviet Union. So that was one of the things, like, that was a big contrast, is just how, just how nice the modern version looks, whereas the old one is like, this does feel like I am watching, kind of a budget version. Even though, the performances are very nice. And it's great that you've got, like, the actual locations. You've actually got Novodevichy Monastery, and you've actually got, like, the Peter and Paul Monastery in the background. So that's very cool. But, it just, I think if you're coming to this having not watched a lot of Soviet films, like, the aesthetic might be a bit like, oh,
a little jarring.
They were working with some limitations though, versus 21st century Hollywood. But but that was interesting, the moustache detail, just because that seemed to be something that Tolstoy had a bit of a thing for, because Lisa in War and Peace,
you read my mind,
has a bit of a bit of peach fuzz going on that top lip, and I don't know whether this, because my version of studying for this was reading a chapter out of Viv Grosskop's The Anna Karenina Fix, and she mentions the fact that, like, she says in an early draft of Anna Karenina, Anna had some lip fuzz going on. And I don't know what she means by an early draft. Like, I didn't know whether that's like the serialized version that was published in journals versus like the fully published novel, or whether it was literally in a draft. I'm not sure, but that does seem to be like a very specific thing to put in. But Tolstoy was an interesting man with interesting tastes. I know, understatement of the century. A man of strong opinions.
That's for sure.
Ever since we started this podcast, I can't escape a friend of mine talking about Tolstoy's kumis addiction.
Trying to convert the world to Christian anarchism and kumis.
That's it.
His life.
That's all you need.
Life's missions.
Yep.
Pacifism.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the Spanish Inquisition sketch. Pacifism and kumis and Christian anarchism. And rejecting modernity. I don't like planes.
Oh, Leo.
I have to say, it is interesting that, like, there was a movie version of Anna Karenina made within, because he died, 1909, 1910? Within a couple of years of his death, there is a movie version of Anna Karenina being made. It's just like, that is how much impact that story had. It's just so weird to me also that he was just like, no, I hate that book.
Well, that's what a spiritual crisis will do to you, I guess.
Apparently, yeah.
I would have been happy if I had written this book, but,
It's just like, nope, it's appalling trash. And I'm a terrible person for bringing it into the world. Oh, man.
Yeah. Well, I think that's about everything we had to cover for today. There's obviously a lot more that could be said. But before we totally wrap up, Allie, we've had a lot of fun. But we got to ask you, on a scale of 1 to Yeltsin, how drunk are you?
I think I am a Stiva Oblonsky level of merriment,
Yeah.
I'm enjoying the finer things of life, including birch juice-infused vodka.
Yeah.
So, cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, I feel that. Cheers.
I think I made it to any number of adaptations in the dance scene when, for whatever reason, people who adapt Russian stuff feel the need to do like those scenes with like the heavy breathing and the camera like going in a circle. And I feel like I'm the one with the camera going around in the circle.
Oh yeah,
it's just cut it. It's a lot.
I mean, both of them loved their whip pans.
Mm-hmm.
I think even the 67 version, perhaps even slightly more.
In that dance scene, yeah, it did a lot of it.
Yeah, that was one thing, actually. Like, it was interesting, the Soviet version's attitude to religion. Because on the one hand, you get this really, like, grandiose scene of an Orthodox wedding that's very, like, reverently shot. And then you have the Lydia character, who is just, like, Soviet anti-religious, like, haha, religious people, stupid, am I right?
Yeah.
Which, you know... It's not that, like, the points that they're making are invalid, but it's just so heavy-handed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she plays a religious person in the actual novel. She plays like a basically like born again, like Christian. She's a fascinating character.
Yeah, sort of Orthodox style. So is that closer to, because that is definitely a minor character that I do not remember from reading it like 15 years ago.
Her role, basically, I'm pretty sure she like moves in with Karenina towards the end of the book, and she's the more or less corrupting influence on him.
Because he has that tendency anyway. Like, I may be misremembering this, but I seem to remember hearing somewhere that Konstantin Pobedonostsev, the like tutor to, I want to say, Alexander III and Nicholas II, who was, you know, obviously incredibly influential, that Karenin was Tolstoy kind of taking the piss out of that guy, and he picked up on that and was super angry, and that may have contributed to Tolstoy being excommunicated by the Orthodox Church. I don't know whether that is absolute hogwash, but I feel like I've heard that somewhere, and I was just kind of like, that's pretty funny, Tolstoy, because like Pobedonostsev was a like genuinely terrible human and deserved to be like immortalized in an unflattering way.
Yeah.
In a great work of literature. So I guess that's the joy of being Tolstoy.
I guess.
Just your people you disapprove of, like immortalized forever as being pretty crap. And, you know, deservedly so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we were wrapping up the show.
How did you end up, Cameron? Are you a whip pan? Where are you?
Okay. So in the 2012 version, Anna's like post like I'm with Vronsky kind of breakdown is really more spiritual. In the 1967 version, you have also her developing, I think, a slight addiction to morphine, where she like every night in order to sleep, she drinks a lot of whiskey, I assume, and also drinks a lot of morphine in that whiskey, which I'm surprised she woke up after doing that quite often, apparently. I feel like right about there, this is actually a pretty strong porter. So it's like 9%. So this is at 1 p.m. in the afternoon after like having a light breakfast of just some fruit and cottage cheese. It's really hitting. So yeah, so I'm about there. But what... Before I get too into the weeds on that, what are we reading next week, Matt?
Next week, we're going to be reading the first half of Gazelle Yakina's Zulaika. It won the Yasnaya Polyana Literary Award and the Big Book Award in 2015.
And, you know, great link as well with Yasnaya Polyana.
Indeed. Almost like we planned it that way. We totally didn't, but it's almost like we did.
Serendipity at work.
Yeah.
Just, you know, oh my goodness.
Before we let you go, we want to extend a sincere thank you to all of our current patrons. We've got Jeff, Janice, Anne, Emily, Jesse, Madeline, Daniel, Alex, Paige, Darren, Lou, Gary, Daniel, Jack, and Alex. And, last but not least, Roland. Podcasting isn't free, and grad school doesn't pay very well, so if you're interested in joining with our current patrons to keep the show running, take a look at patreon.com/tipsytolstoy.
The music used in this episode was Soviet March by Toasted Tomatoes. You can find more of their stuff on toastedtomatoes.bandcamp.com and also on YouTube under the same username. If you're looking for other places to find us, you can also follow us on Instagram at Tipsy Tolstoy Podcast or join our email list on our website, tipsytolstoy.com. We would, of course, like to extend a huge thank you to Ali for coming on. And Ali, where are a few places we can find you on the internet?
So you can find me on Twitter at Russophiles U. Russophiles Unite Movie Podcast is also on Facebook and Instagram, and wherever your podcatcher of choice, you'll find me on there. So do come and check out the show. Thank you, both of you, so much for having me on. This has been a blast. It's been super fun.
Of course, it's been a really good time.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.